depicts the frontal lobe, the blue depicts the parietal lobe, the green depicts the occipital lobe, while the yellow depicts the temporal lobe. The line of boundary between the frontal and parietal lobe is the central sulcus. So that makes this first bump here, or this red area here on either hemisphere, is the precentral gyrus. Okay, the precentral, because it's before the central sulcus, and the gyrus is the bump. So the precentral gyrus, which is your primary motor cortex. The bump right after the central sulcus is the postcentral gyrus. So this bump here, or this blue bump here, again, either hemisphere of the brain, is the postcentral gyrus. And by the way, this whole thing is called the cerebrum. The gray area is called the cerebellum. Okay, so that's one specific sulcus, is the central sulcus, and then those two are the specific gyrus. The sulcus, and a lot of people want to call this a fissure because it's actually more of a crack than a shallow depression, but read the question. I'll call it a shallow depression. The sulcus, or shallow depression, that separates the parietal lobe from the temporal lobe is the lateral sulcus. Like your ears are off to the side, the lateral side of your head. This is the lateral sulcus. Okay? The last sulcus is the boundary line between the parietal lobe and the occipital lobe. It's the parietal occipital sulcus. And it can only be shown on color brain because beige brain really doesn't represent it. So the parietal occipital sulcus is this, line of distinction between the blue and the green, parietal occipital sulcus. Okay? Now there are two fissures. The one that you can separate the hemispheres of the brain is the longitudinal fissure. The second fissure is often confused with the lateral sulcus. It separates the cerebrum from the cerebellum here. This is the transverse fissure. So longitudinal and transverse fissure. Transverse for cross section. Okay, so you can see why lateral sulcus, a lot of people confuse one with the other. But remember, lateral, your ears are off to the side, so lateral sulcus between the temporal lobe and parietal lobe. So that's what I'm going to give just for color brain for now. Okay, 3 points.